heard me speak. Some of this stuff you'll hear again, but I wanted to explain exactly what I was doing and where we've gotten and how we've gotten here. So I am the fellow who brought the Pledge of Allegiance case. It started in 1997, Thanksgiving, of all things. I was visiting some friends, and I was buying them a gift, and I looked at the coins and currency, and I saw "In God We Trust" on everything. It just struck me. I actually have been collecting coins since I was a kid, but it just didn't hit me before that it's on everything. And I said, that can't be right. I had gone to law school. I never practiced law. It was years before. It was actually almost a decade earlier. But I remember there was something in the Constitution about religion that didn't sound right. And the people I was visiting were both law professors, a husband and wife. When I got to their house, I said, I was really fuming by the time I got there. I said, did you see this? I said, what? I said, it says, "In God We Trust" on our coins and currency. They said they thought it had been there for a while. I said, well, I'm getting it off. And that's how this whole thing started. So first thing I did is I went to the internet. Google was just getting business there, and I put in God We Trust, and you come up with the Treasury Department website that tells you the story about God We Trust. It's interesting because they say it came out because of the religious sentiment at the time of the Civil War. It started in the 1860s. I'll discuss this in a little bit. So I went through that, and then the next hit you get tells about the last case that they had, which was Gaylor versus United States. And Gaylor from the Freedom from Religion Foundation had brought a case in the 10th Circuit. Let me explain a little about that. I assume many of you don't know the legal system. I didn't know until I started this. I didn't even learn it in law school. Certainly, actually, I learned more law in med school, I guess. But in any event, so the way it works is we have basically two legal systems in this country. We have a state legal system, and every state has one, and then we have the federal legal system. And they all look the same in as much as there's a lower level. You go to the court when you bring a case. And then if you don't like the result of that case, you get to the Court of Appeals, and you have a right always to appeal a case. So if you lose in what's called the district court in the federal system, you can appeal to the Court of Appeals. And we have 11 numbered courts of appeals in the federal circuit, and they go geographically somewhat. They start in the First Circuit, which is up in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. They throw in Puerto Rico, just to remind you that it's the federal government. And then it works its way around. We're in the Ninth Circuit out here. The 10th Circuit was where the case was brought last time. I was in Denver. And so there's all these different circuit courts. And then, so that's the courts, they're called the courts of appeal or the circuit courts. It's the same thing. And then after that, if you lose there, then you can appeal to the highest court, which is the Supreme Court. But when you appeal to the Supreme Court, it's discretionary. Whereas you have a right to go to the Court of Appeals, right? You have an absolute right to be heard there. You don't have a right to get to the Supreme Court. So when you hear people talk about, I'm going to take this to the Supreme Court, you can go find somebody else to listen to because that person obviously doesn't know what they're talking about. You can't take something to the Supreme Court. You can, when you lose at the Court of Appeals, ask them to hear it, but they only take about 1% of the cases. They get about 8,000 applications a year, and they take about 80 cases. So your odds are 99 to 1 that you're not going to get heard if you appeal the case. I was heard at the Supreme Court because I won in the Court of Appeals, and so the government appealed. And obviously this was a case that the Supreme Court couldn't let stand because we have two different types of pledges of allegiance, so they kind of had to take it. But that's how that works. So you can't bring something to the Supreme Court. Along the same lines, when you hear that the Supreme Court let stand a decision of the Court of Appeals, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they upheld it. Right? They can only take 1% of the cases, so 99% of the time. Even if it's a good case that they'd like to take, they just can't. There's this room. So on their docket. So if you hear them in the Supreme Court didn't take a case, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they agree, they disagree. It means nothing. It means they couldn't fit it in. So those are the things to keep in mind. So anyhow, so I brought this case. I decided I was going to challenge In God We Trust other coins and currency. And I started to bring a case. Now, how do you bring a case? I had no idea. They don't actually teach that in law school. They teach all this other stuff, which you don't understand anyhow until you start using it. But they don't teach you how to bring it. Like most professional schools, you don't learn how to do anything until you actually do it. So I called up the district court. I was in Florida at the time. And I said, hi, I want to file a case. How do you do this? And they're very nice. They tell you the papers to file. So I filed papers. And I actually called up the lawyer. One of the nice things about the internet and on all legal papers is you have to put the name of the lawyer. And so I called up in the 10th Circuit, that case Gaylor, and I called the attorney and said, hi, I'm going to file and get In God We Trust off the coins and currency. And he said, well, we already tried and we didn't succeed. I said, I know, I saw that, but I'll get it done. So kind of arrogant, seeing as I had no idea what I was doing. And he says, well, good luck to you. And I said, I have one problem. I don't know how to file a lawsuit. What's it supposed to look like? So he sent me, fortunately, his complaint. And I modeled my complaint after that. I plagiarized and filed my thing when I was in Florida and started on my way. And so I'm going this, and I don't know anything about the Establishment Clause at this point. I know nothing about the cases or anything. And I start researching it. Basically, just all you need is the internet, computer, and you start reading. And so I did, and I was up till 3 or 4 every night. And I really found this stuff fascinating. It's really interesting stuff. And so I was going through what's going on. And as I go through all the cases, it seems that they always talk about not only in God we trust, but they talk about the Pledge of Allegiance. They talk about a whole bunch of things. They talk about that God we trust is our motto, God we trust is on our coins and currency. They talk about the Supreme Court that starts off every case. God save the United States in this honorable court. They talk about the fact that the Congress starts off every session with a prayer with paid chaplains, paid for with tax dollars to pray to God. And they talk about all they always talk about is under God and the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, now that's different from, it's different from in God we trust as the motto, because the Pledge of Allegiance was put into place in 1892, and it didn't have God in it. And in 1954, Congress came in and stuck in the 2 words, under God. So they added to a pledge that we had. And as you read through the cases, you learn that one of the things that the Supreme Court says is you can't do something for religious purposes. So in God we trust as our motto, they can say, well, it's a motto and it's the whole thing, it's finagled. We all know it's a crock, and it was for religious purposes, but they can make up some story. But they can't do that with the Pledge of Allegiance, because the Pledge of Allegiance was there. It was working. 62 years it did all those things that we needed it to do, and all of a sudden they came and they did nothing but take that pledge and add the 2 words under God. That you can't do. So I'm saying to myself, gosh, I wish I had that case. That's a better case. What do I do in God we trust for? It's like, that's a killer. And my daughter was just about to start in kindergarten, so everything was working out fine. I took that. It was a sign from above. I said, okay, change this case. And so I decided I was going to change the case, but then I kept saying, well, I don't know what I'm doing here, and I already am over my head. I don't want to change this case. I'll just leave it like this. And the way it works is when you file to a case against a defendant, under the rules, there's a thing called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, and it's a rule. It tells you how to play this game. So when you file, normally the defendants have 20 days to respond. But if you're the government of the United States, because you have $10 billion to spend on this stuff, they give you 60 days to respond. So that gave me a month before I heard back from them. So I'm doing a lot of research. I'm learning a lot of stuff in 2 months. And then the 60 days come due, and I'm still, every time I read these cases, they talk about under God and the Pledge of Allegiance. That's the case issue. Nah, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. So I go back and forth, and then when the 60 days come due, all of a sudden, the U.S. attorney, which is who's handling the case for the government, calls me up and says, we'd like an extension for 60 days. I took that as another sign from above. I said, okay, gave me the extension, and I changed my case, because under Federal Rules 15, you're allowed to change your case. So I did, and I made it under God and the Pledge, and as you know, I eventually won in the Ninth Circuit. So that's where we were. And I'm going to talk a little about the Pledge case. I'm going to spend actually more time on the God we trust, because that's what I filed now since. So the Pledge case continued. You go to the district court, like I said, it was there, and the district court judge threw it out, which is a great thing. One of the things I learned when I looked at that Gaylor case, the Freedom from Religion Foundation actually commissioned a poll, which in today's dollars probably would be about $15,000 to pay for one of these polls. They said they knew that there's various tests that the Supreme Court comes up with, and they say, okay, these are how we're going to decide if something violates the Establishment Clause. And I didn't mention that, but the Establishment Clause is what it's all about. I'll give you a quick history of our government. We decided England was a bad guy. We had a Revolutionary War. We fought him. We won, in case you didn't hear. Okay? Now it's the Declaration of Independence. We said we're going to come out there, declare that we're going to separate from England. And what they did is in the Declaration of Independence, which people reference all the time, is there's 4 references to God. We're doing this, divine providence is going to do this. We do this for all these reasons. Nature is God. They talk about we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So everybody talks about God stuff. Well, that was 1776. The war ended in 1781, 1783. We signed the treaty the Treaty of Paris with England, ended the war, and then during that period between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, there was a major change in thought. And remember, people talk about our history of believing in God. Well, that's true. All right? When they came over for the glory of God. They also came over for the advancement of the Christian religion and for the honor of the King of England. And they always say, well, we should have under God because the Mayflower Compact says the glory of God. Well, that's the logic, then it also should be a nation under Jesus, because that would work. They came over for the advancement of Christianity, or one nation under the King of England, because that's also why they came over. So I'm not sure that's great logic, but that's what they use.